Okay, we're doing Parshas Emor on 672, if you want to follow. So it begins that it says Hashem tells Moshe to tell the Kohanim, who are the sons of Aaron, Marta Lehem, say to them the following: Lenefesh liyutama b'yama, that you're not allowed to make yourself tameh. That is, you can't put yourself into a place where you are spiritually contaminated. But we know that a Kohen, today we know a Kohen doesn't go to the cemetery, right? That's what it's one of the examples of what it refers to. Is a Kohen has to be available to go into the temple, and you can't go into the temple if you have this spiritual contamination. Now, that's anybody can't go in, but even during the days of the temple, it's not that common that the average person would go. They'd have to have a reason to go to the temple. You didn't just go all the time. It's like our going to court. You can go to court any time you want, but there's not much reason for you to go. Maybe once, twice in your life you might have to go, but a Kohen has to be available. So because of the status of the Kohen and the special way that he is, he has this rule. At Kohen Gadol, it's even more so. But what's interesting is that Hashem tells Moshe that Moshe should tell the Kohanim. And so Rashi's wondering about this. Why is it that Moshe has to do this to tell the Kohanim, and then the Kohanim have to tell the other Kohanim? Like, why is it that it's done in such a way? And so Rashi says that he has to tell them, Lahazir hagadolim ala katanim. The elders have to tell the younger ones. That is, the older Kohanim have to tell their children. Right? It's sort of like, you can imagine if today you have a family of Kohens. Right? So, Johnny Cohen, and he gets married and he has a child, and they go and the child wants to play baseball with his friends. So they go out to play baseball, and somebody hits the ball, and it flies into a cemetery. Now, that kid is a Kohen. He can't go into the cemetery to get the baseball. Right? And he's going to think, well, this is ridiculous. I'm a little kid. What am I? But I want to play baseball. There is no temple today. So the idea of it is that the Torah is telling us that the older Kohanim have to influence the younger ones to understand that this is actually a positive and important thing. That the inability for a Kohen to go into a cemetery is not because a Kohen can't go in a cemetery. It's because a Kohen is on a spiritual level, right, where going into a cemetery has a negative effect on them. It's like, royalty have to have shiny shoes, but they're not going to shine their shoes. And if they are going to, they're not going to do it in front of you, right? Because they're royalty. Royalty has a certain dignity that even if they want to do something, they can't do it. Like we used to notice, when you had Diana, when she was the princess, so whenever she would dress like most women in England, right, they'd put it in the newspaper. Look at how Diana is dressed, so revealing. Right, such modern clothes, right, and they'd all comment on it. Why? Because royalty doesn't do that. Royalty are royalty. Royalty has a certain dignity, and even if they don't want to have that dignity, they have that dignity. And if they don't act that way, it looks like there's something wrong with them. It's like if you have a person who's a multimillionaire and he drives around in an old beat-up car. Right, for the average person to do that, you'd say that person is being, careful with their money. He wants a car to get around, but he doesn't need a car to be fancy or to show off. So he's a very mature person. He decides he's going to not buy a fancy car. But if you have a person who's like the richest person in the country and he drives around in a car like that, you think there's something wrong with him. Like,
that's how he got rich.
Yeah, but how do you there's a certain dignity you expect of a person, right? Or they make a wedding. You expect that they're going to make a nice wedding, right? You're not going to make a cheap wedding, right? If they do, people say something's funny about these people. These people. Why? Because there are certain expectations placed on people who have what they call the idea of royalty, of a certain. It's a certain dignity that they carry with them, even if they don't want. And a Kohen has this dignity among the Jewish people. They have a role that requires them to be spiritually uncontaminated, right? Which is, right, to be contaminated or not contaminated is not good or bad. It's a fact, right? It's not that if all of us are spiritually unable. We have this contamination. We all do. It's just because there are many ways of acquiring it, and there are no ways of getting rid of it today. So because of it, we all have it. And it doesn't make us good or bad. You can be the greatest person in the world and you have it, or you could be the weakest person. You could be born and you have it as soon as you're born. It's just how we are. But a Kohen has a certain expectation because of their dignity that they can't. Yes?
So, Rabbi, in South Africa, the Beit Din said that the Kohanim could come to the cemetery, but down the pathways, they put a white line on each side that they could only go down this path. They had to be so many feet away from where the
right. So they were specifying that that's not considered in the cemetery. That's what they were doing.
Yes.
So when you're saying that they would go in the cemetery to these special areas, the fact was, in the eyes of the Beis Din, they weren't going in the cemetery, right? So that's the idea. So as it goes on, then we see the Kohen has to be educated. The parents have to teach the children. Otherwise, the children see being a Kohen as just being a pain, right? And you want them to understand that that's not the case. That it's really because of the special privilege of who they are, the special role who they are. We give them specific rules, right? And the more rules they have means that the greater they innately are. So that's how it begins. And so it says that they can't be the nefesh lo yital b'yamav. They're not allowed to contaminate themselves with among the people, meaning among a dead person. And one of the things is this shows you why being contaminated in the spiritual sense is not good or bad, is because what it's saying is that
Can I just get more from
Sure.
the library?
One of the greatest mitzvahs we can do is to bury the dead, because a dead person is not able to thank you. So you're doing a kindness to them with no expectation of any type of reward for it. And therefore, it's considered that if in the old days, you would find people who would die and there'd be no one to bury them. They'd be just there. So for a person to go out of their way to take that deceased person and to bury them is an enormous mitzvah. So to do such a thing, right, it can't be that it's bad, because it makes you contaminated when you touch the dead. So here you've got competing ethics. You've got on one side the greatest mitzvah of burying a dead person, on the other hand the idea of being tahor, of being spiritually able to do certain things. To show you why it's not bad to be tameh, to be contaminated spiritually, in order to do this mitzvah, that has to happen. So it's got nothing to do with good or bad, right? It's got nothing to do with dirty and clean. It has to do with the spiritual ability that you would have or not. And that's why it's saying, so that's why a person, right, a Kohen, if he has certain people in his family die, he can go to the cemetery, and go to the funeral. If a friend dies, he can't, because of his specific, specific place among the people. And then it continues, and it says here, starting with verse 5, about a person should not make a bald spot on their head, they should not shave the edge of their beard, and they should not make a gash. What is it like referring to? That it's saying that in general now, we're not talking now specifically about a Kohen, but any person, right, who loses someone, right? They go to a funeral. Have you ever gone to funerals for different ethnic groups? You know that different ethnic groups show their bereavement in different ways. You had it was very common where I grew up with the Italian families, that if a husband died, the wife would try to jump into the grave. Right? They'd never let her. Right? I don't know. I never saw a case where that actually could. I mean, even if they did, they didn't let them stay there. But they would do it. It was a symbol in their culture, right? You had ones where different people would do different things, right? So among the ancients, the pagans, they used to pain themselves. They would scratch themselves until they bled, so they'd feel the pain physically, and they would express their pain that way. And these are examples. They would create a bald spot on their head. They'd pull their hair out. Right? They would shave the edge of their beards, and their flesh. They should not cut a gash. They would cut themselves, because they felt pain, and they would show it that way. So they're telling us God's saying you can't do that. That's not something that we do. They shall be holy to their God. They shall not desecrate the name of their God. Right? For the fire offerings of Hashem, the food of their God, they offer so they may remain holy. So it's telling you here now, but the Kohanim, because they have to be involved with the various rituals, they can't be involved with anything to do with the dead. And then what else? It says, they shall not marry a woman who's a harlot or has been desecrated, and they shall not marry a woman who's been divorced by her husband, for each one is holy to his God. So let's think about this. What are they saying? That he can't marry a prostitute. Okay, that would make sense. And you can imagine a person who's, he is like the chief rabbi goes and marries a prostitute. You say there's something wrong there. It's weird, right? Even if she's changed, still and we believe in tshuva and repentance. Still, it's odd. Or a number of other things. But what's wrong with marrying a divorced woman? Like why is it anything? You could have a woman who gets married and she's just made a bad choice, and she marries a crazy man. She marries a drug addict. She marries a wife beater. She's done nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with her. And she goes to the court and she says, I need to get a divorce. And they get him to give her a divorce. And now she can't marry a Kohen. What is it about to a Kohen that he can't marry such a woman when really we know there's nothing wrong with her? Right? It could be something wrong with her, but that's on an individual basis. By definition, because she's divorced doesn't make her bad. So why is the Torah telling us this? So this really gives us a clue to really what the Torah is saying about the Kohen's role. It's not telling us that a number of the things that a Kohen is unable to do is because they're bad, or that there's something wrong with them. Right? There's nothing wrong with going after your baseball in a cemetery. Right? Nothing wrong with that if that happens. There's nothing wrong with going to the funeral of a close friend. What could be wrong with that? But a Kohen can't do these things. There's nothing wrong with a woman necessarily who's divorced. But in every one of these instances of things that a Kohen can't do, we have to understand that a Kohen's role is that the people look at the Kohen as being almost superhuman. It's sort of like how I hear this from rabbis a lot, how some people look at their rabbi. They look at the rabbi the rabbi would do the same. The rabbi would do the same thing that I do, that the person saying this would do. It would be a scandal for the rabbi, but for the average person it wouldn't. Right? The Gemara gives an example. It says a rabbi is not allowed to charge at the butcher market, because of course back then they didn't have charge cards like we have, or charge accounts. And then he went to the butcher and he wanted to buy meat, and the butcher gives him meat, and he says to the butcher, I don't have any money now, can I pay you later? So a rabbi is not allowed to do that, even though the butcher would let him, and there's nothing wrong with it, because it lowers the dignity of the profession, of who you are. There's a certain dignity, so he can't do that. That's what the Kohen is, the same thing. What is the Kohen's role? Is that there can be no feeling that the Kohen has a flaw of any sort. The people they look at the Kohen and say, the average person who's the Kohen is saying, he's an extension of God. I'm bringing my sacrifice to him, and he's offering it to God. He's like God. Not that he's God, right? We don't believe that humans are like that. But he's represents God. Sort of like how some people see a rabbi representing God, and therefore, good or bad, they will treat the rabbi differently. So with a Kohen, it's like that. Now, in the case of a divorced woman, we all acknowledge that there's nothing wrong with such a woman. But we also all have to acknowledge that people have a feeling in many cases, certainly until, let's say, when I was a child and before, that if you have a woman who's divorced, the presumption was that there's something funny, that it wasn't normal. When I grew up, I only knew one family that had a divorce when I was a child. Okay, I came from a small town, but I know factually that, of course, things have changed. And it doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with the woman or with the man. Right? Each case is different. But the Torah is telling us it causes people to look at them funny. Why is he marrying this woman who, she was whatever she was, that she had to have a divorce? So even if there's nothing really wrong with her, we're talking about optics, how something appears to the world. For instance, it says a Kohen who has a flaw, a physical flaw, he can't serve as a Kohen if he has one arm longer than the other. Right? I have one arm longer than the other. I mean, it's maybe a little bit, right? But it's so little that even the tailor doesn't notice it. But if I was a Kohen, I couldn't serve. Right? It happened because I dislocated my shoulder years ago, and so one is a little bit off. But you have people who have one leg longer than another. You have, even another example, it says if a Kohen has one eyebrow, you know how the eyebrows can go across? He can't serve as a Kohen. Does that make him a bad guy? Is there something wrong with him? There's nothing wrong with him.
So can he not go up and duchen?
No, they can't. They can't serve in the temple.
Oh, I see.
Right? It's
So
something that doesn't
that's
affect
different.
us. Right? It's something from them.
Oh,
But what it's saying is that the average person walks in, and they're looking to have a spiritual experience in the temple. They're bringing their animal for a sacrifice, and they're all inspired, and they go to the Kohen, and the Kohen has like a physical flaw. There's nothing wrong with a person with a physical flaw, but in the eyes of the person, the Kohen has to be perfect. So God is saying that in this role, we have to take into account the optics, which we don't usually have to do. Right? Normally, we're actually told not to do the opposite. You don't judge people, because a guy's, got one eyebrow, or he's got one arm longer than another, or he's got one leg. That you don't judge people on that. You judge them on a much deeper level, if you judge them at all. But you certainly don't do it on that. But with a Kohen, they're taking into account that people do. It's sort of like, I'm supposed to make sure I don't judge people and such things. But if God forbid I was a person like that, I had, let's say, one leg, and people judged me badly, they judged me as whatever reason, they'd be wrong in doing it. But I know it's a fact. They do it. People do this. Right? It's a fact of reality. People do that. People who are very overweight, right? When you meet people like that, the average person on the street looks at them as if they're not intelligent. That's just how it is today. People who smoke today are looked at as they're not as educated as people like 25 years ago. When people smoked, they looked like they were cool or European or right,
to be
sophisticated.
Joy.
Right? Today, it's changed. Right? These things have changed. These are all examples that are incorrect. They're not true. You can't judge a person by their physical or anything, but the fact is people do. So that's why the Kohen has these rules, because the Kohen has to appear to be perfect, even if he's not, but he has to appear to be. And that's why you have all these rules that are put in here. And the Kohen Gadol, for instance, he's got even a higher level. Now, we don't have Kohen Gadols today, but if we did, now he's not only not allowed to marry a divorced woman, he can't marry a woman who isn't a virgin, period. He's only allowed to marry a virgin. And that's because he is the number one Kohen, right? And he's definitely looked at by the people as being an extraordinary figure, and that, you can imagine if he goes and marries, I'll give you a perfect example. In the 1970s, right, from the 50s to the 70s, you've heard of the Neturei Karta, right? They're a group that most of us, don't think very highly of. They're very extreme in their political beliefs. At one time, the Neturei Karta was where they were as extreme, but they were led by a very righteous man, a man who was an extraordinary figure, who really believed in the beliefs that they had. And he wasn't trying to show off. He wasn't trying to get his name in the newspaper. He really lived his life this way. Right now, you could disagree with him, but you couldn't say he wasn't real. Right? So this man, back then, they didn't do crazy things like today, where they go to meet with the head of Iran. He wasn't like that. He didn't believe in the state, and because he didn't believe in the state, he wouldn't use their money, and he wouldn't take charity from them, and he just wouldn't deal with it. But he certainly didn't side with their enemies. But he didn't. Right? That was his belief, and he couldn't stand for people coming to Israel and not keeping the Torah. So he would go down to the movie theaters, and he would do whatever he could to stop people on Shabbos from going to the movies. In Jerusalem, this was done. So he was a well-respected person, though extreme. But late in life, like in his late 60s, he got married again for the second time, and he married a woman who was a convert, who had been a French dancer, like in Paris. She had been a dancer in Paris, and then she converted to Judaism. She became a very righteous woman. Right? I actually saw her a few times. She was younger than him, so she lived later. So I saw her. She used to come and raise money for the organization and speak for the organization. And she was a strikingly attractive woman, even in her late 60s when I saw her, because she was much younger when she married him. And did he do something wrong? nothing wrong, right? She whatever reason he saw her as a soulmate, she saw him as a soulmate. They got married. The convert is no different than any other Jew, but yet when he did it, it caused his organization to split. They had whole fights. It was right. It's not right. They should do it. What do you care? This is his personal life. He's not breaking the Torah. He's not breaking rabbinic law. He's acting right. But they all had a comment. Why? Because it was, here's our great leader marrying a woman who was a dancer, danced in nightclubs. Right? We're not talking about a ballet dancer. This was like a woman who danced in nightclubs. Right? So, is there anything wrong with her? No, there's nothing wrong with her. But we can sort of understand, even though we don't agree with what happened. That's what it's talking about with the Kohen, the same idea. Right? We don't agree with it, and Hashem doesn't agree with it, but he says we have to, these are realities of how people are. So it goes on and tells you many other things about the Kohen, what he can do, what he can't do, who they are. And if you look on the bottom of 675, it goes through things that I said before, blemishes that cause him not being able to do things. If he's blind or he's lame, his nose has no bridge, he has one limb longer than the other, and he goes through a bunch of them that they can't serve. They're still Kohanim. They still have privileges of being a Kohen. They get to certain types of things that the people have to give them, but they can't serve in the temple. Right? And then the next section, right, deals with some of the positive things of being a Kohen, where a Kohen gets to eat truma is one of those examples, and he gets the offerings. For instance, if one of us would go to the temple with a cow to offer a sacrifice, the Kohen gets a portion of the cow. That's part of his pay, so to speak, right? So they get that. They also get truma, which is that a portion of our fields has to be divided off and given to the Kohen. Now, Kohanim could become quite wealthy because of it. If you're living at a time where people are affluent, the Kohen would get percentages of everybody's money. And there'd be lots of Kohanim, but still, they would become quite affluent. If you go now to Jerusalem and you look at some of the the archaeology that's done there and some of the homes that they found going back to the first or second temple, you see homes that are so elaborate. And these were the homes of the Kohanim. You have they have one of them that I saw there underneath someone's house. They went and they excavated. They found a house that had 8 bedrooms, 4 mikvahs. It had bathrooms in it. And we're talking about it from the 1st century and earlier. And these big, beautiful homes that they had, because Kohanim could be quite wealthy. Even the Kohanim who had flaws could become wealthy because they could get truma, they could get this food that was given to them, and that's because they can't work, right? They're not able to have a job because they work for the temple. That was their job, and God doesn't give them cash, right? He says people have to give them a percentage of their money, and that's what they did, and that's how they lived. So it's not like the person who did have the flaw would starve to death. He would get all of that anyways. And then it just goes on telling you after that about the facts that other people are not allowed to eat of it, and the Kohen can give it to his family, but then at a certain point, parts of his family he can't. For instance, if the Kohen has sons and daughters, so as soon as his daughter gets married, if she marries a non-Kohen, she's not allowed to eat it anymore, because she's now in a new family. As long as she stays with her father or she marries a Kohen, she's considered like a Kohen. Okay, so she's allowed to eat it. But as soon as she marries out of the family, which was perfectly fine, you don't have to marry a Kohen, then she would no longer have that.
But a man who is a Kohen and marries a woman from a non-Kohen, that doesn't apply.
It applies in reverse.
Yeah.
She becomes part, because when a woman left her home and entered into another home, whatever that home was is what she became. Right? We have lots of people, women, they'll tell me that they come from a family of Kohanim. Right? That's very common, right? But then they marry someone who's not a Kohen, so they're not part of that family anymore theoretically. Right? As far as these things are concerned. Same thing with any types of restrictions and things applies. As we go to the next part. So the next section in this parsha talks about the holidays. It starts on 682 and 683. Right, Hashem tells Moshe, speak to the children of Israel, say to them Hashem's festivals. So, and then it goes through the festivals. For 6 days labors may be done, the seventh day is a day of rest, a holy convocation, you shan't do any work. That's Shabbos, right? So that's the first of the holidays. And then it has all these other ones. It says, in the first month, on the 14th of the month, in the afternoon is the time of the Pesach offering. So the first month of the year is Nisan. The 14th day in the late afternoon, we would offer the Passover offering, and that night would be Passover. That's like the Seder night, right? So that's what it's telling us. And the 15th day of the month, the next day, is the festival of matzahs. And you shall eat matzahs for 7 days, right? This is how we know about those laws. And then it goes on, and it goes in pretty much in a chronological order. After Passover is Sfiras Omer, where we're in right now. Right? Verse 9, Hashem says to Moshe, speak to the children of Israel, say to them, when you enter the land I give you, and you reap its harvest, you shall bring an Omer from your first harvest to the Kohen. What is this? We have an idea, but Omer is not a thing. Omer is an amount. It's a funny way that the Torah talks about it, but it's saying that you should bring barley. How much barley? An omer worth. So it's like I'd say, how much barley? A quart. So the omer isn't a thing, it's a amount. So it's telling you they have to bring this much, and he has to bring it to in front of God for a sacrifice. So this is done every day, starting on the second day of Passover until Shavuos, 49 days. Right? We don't have the offering today because we don't have the temple and all of these things. So we count the days. That's how we do it. You count each day of the 49 days. Now, this is on a literal sense what the Torah tells us to do. Now, what's behind this holiday is that it's, as I said, it starts on the second day of Passover. It concludes on just before Shavuos. Like as Shavuos begins, it ends. Right? That's 49 days between the two. Shavuos begins at the end of the 49th day. And so as we have this going, what is it telling us? Like, what's the message for us? The message is, if we understand, looking back at the first people who kept this were the Jews who came out of Egypt. So they were slaves, and they were taken out of Egypt specifically at this time, because we're told that Hashem said, if I don't take the Jews out of Egypt now, there are not going to be any Jews left to take out. They're going to totally assimilate. They're going to be totally lost. Right? And therefore, they had gotten to what we call the 49th level of impurity. The Jews had gotten to the lowest possible level they could, spiritually, because of the slavery they were in and the way they were abused, that if they had waited and they had hit, theoretically, the 50th level, which means that they're totally gone, they're assimilated, they're no longer Jews. Right? They've become part of the society that they're in. They're lost. So the job is that every day from the second day of Passover until Shavuos, we had 49 days. And in every one of those days, we would work on ourselves to raise our level day after day after day from the 49th lowest level, right, back up to the top. Right? So going back up to the top is 49 days later. The idea is taking people who are slaves, right? Slaves are, have no responsibility on their life. They don't choose who they marry. They don't choose what they eat. They don't choose when they go to bed. They don't choose when they get up. They don't choose what they do. Everything is told to them by the master. They have no independent ability to choose. Right? It's like I speak to some people once who they were telling me how when they came out in Russia, and the Jews who lived in Russia, and they would be there, they'd find that, you walk down the street and you'd see a truck and a lineup, and you'd go and wait in that line. They had no difference what they were selling. You needed whatever you needed, you'd wait in line until you got to that front of that truck, and whatever they had, you bought it. And then they would come to America. When I was living in America, they would tell me how they'd go into a grocery store and there'd be like 100 types of toilet paper, and they have no idea what to do, because how did they buy it before? They'd wait in line, and whatever was there, they bought it. Right now, they walk into a store and there's a whole store full. Like, how do you choose, right? It was shocking, right? That a slave has the same idea. The slave doesn't have to choose anything. They don't choose what they eat. They don't choose anything. You come home someday and say, so what do you want to eat for dinner? I don't know. What do you want to eat? No, I don't know. They say, always. Why? Because they never had to choose. So the 49 days were that each day they worked on themselves spiritually to lose the idea of being slaves and to become free people. In order to get the Torah, they had to be a free person. And that's a part of your psyche. We see in the world today, people who were slaves hundreds of years ago still act like slaves today. They still have no culture. Their culture is taken away from them. Right? It's not even their fault. Their culture is destroyed. They have their families aren't complete. They have all kinds of things. They have a certain mentality about them where they think you're always against them, trying to hurt them. These are slaves are like this. So we had to go in 49 days and lose that. So that's what we did. Today, of course, we're not slaves in that sense, but we can use the same period every day where we can take small steps every day to improve ourselves. Right? Every day, something small. We do some positive act. So at the end of 49 days, we can look back at those 7 weeks and say, look how much I advanced in 7 weeks. Each day was insignificant, but 7 weeks adds up. That's what we're in right now. We're at right now on the 32nd day. Right? Tonight begins Lag BaOmer. It's the 32nd day of the counting. And we will go right until we get to Shavuos. We'll keep counting. And we actually say a blessing, and we count the number of days each day. And that's what's going on here. Following that, right, you have the, it continues with the holidays. And then it goes into Rosh Hashanah. And then from Rosh Hashanah, it goes into Yom Kippur, and to a number of other things. So let's take a look at what is really odd here is when we look at Yom Kippur first. It's on 687, 686. Hashem spoke to Moshe saying, on the 10th of this month, it is the Day of Atonement. There shall be a holy convocation for you, and you shall afflict yourselves. You shall offer a fire offering. You shall not do any work. For any soul who will not be afflicted on this day will be cut off. You will not do any work. It is an eternal decree. Right? Now, this begins, right, the discussion on what Yom Kippur is. Now, if you look at the end of it, it is the last line, line 32, from that paragraph that I was reading. It says, it is a day of complete rest for you, and you shall afflict yourselves. Now, here's what when is it? On the 9th of the month in the evening, from evening to evening, shall you rest on this day. Yom Kippur begins on the 9th of the month in the evening. Now, that's a really weird way to tell you when it is. You know what the 9th of the month in the evening is in Hebrew, in Jewish literature, and in the Torah? The 10th of the month. So why are you telling me the 9th? It's like, okay, when's my birthday? Oh, it's on the 7th of February at 12, after midnight. Like, well, that's the 8th of February. So why are you telling me the 7th of February? He's telling you here, right, it begins on the night, right, after this day. Well, right, that's not when Yom Kippur is on the 10th of the month, not on the 9th of the month. So tell me, Yom Kippur is on the 10th. Right? You go through this whole thing telling us it's on the 10th and what you do, and you have to fast. And then it says, on the 9th of the month in the evening, from evening to evening, you shall rest on your rest day. Right? So this tells us a very important idea. I was reading in one of the commentaries, he told a story to illustrate what this is telling us. It says that with the Baal Shem Tov, a great Hasidic Rabbi, the founder of the Hasidic movement, says that one time he was in a sort of a prophetic trance with God, and God showed him who was going to be next to him in the world to come when he dies. You know, who was going to be the righteous person who's going to be living next to him in the world to come. And he decided he wanted to meet this person. So the person lived like not that far, but he had to travel, so he travels out, and he goes to where this person is, and he's like on the edge of the woods, all by himself. And he goes and he comes to the house. He has no idea who the guy is. He knocks on the door, and this giant lumberjack, like a wood chopper, comes to the door. And he invites him in, and he watches this guy. The guy doesn't pray every day, doesn't do anything special. Right? He goes out in the morning, he cuts wood, comes back, and he eats, and he eats, and he eats an enormous amount of food. and then he goes back out and he works some more, and that's all he does is he works and he eats and he works and he eats and he works and he eats. He doesn't pray much. He doesn't say blessings all the time. He doesn't seem to be an overly righteous person. So the Baal Shem Tov says, well, this guy's going to be next to me in the world to come. There must be something special about him. So he says, where did you study Torah? He says, I didn't study Torah. Well, what happens? Do you ever have any prophetic interactions or dreams with God? No. So he says, well, why do you do what you do? So he says, I go and work all day and I eat so much because when I was young, the little town we lived in, the head of the Catholic Church there came in and he said that all the Jews have to convert to Christianity. And if you don't convert, we'll beat you until you convert. And he said that my father was a small, thin man. And they took him and they beat him and beat him and beat him, right, until he was ready to say he'd convert because he was so small and so frail. Finally, he died. Rather than convert, he died because they beat him too much. He said, and I don't want that I should ever have a situation where I'm going to actually think that I might convert. I want to stay Jewish. So I eat like I eat and I work like I work so that I can be strong. And that way, when they come to get me, I'll be able to sustain it. So the Baal Shem Tov says now he understands why this man is going to be next to him in the world to come. Because everything he does in his life, he's doing for the sake of heaven. He's doing it for God. He's eating for the sake of God. He's working, cutting wood for the sake of God. I mean, the same act that you eat because you like the food, it's the same act to eat for the same of God. In both cases, you're eating. In both cases, you like the food. But one is a mitzvah and one is permission. You can do it. You're allowed to eat for yourself, right? But it's a mitzvah to eat for a special reason. And that's what this is telling us here. And the 9th day, it says, the 9th day of the month, there's a mitzvah to eat. The day before Yom Kippur, there's a mitzvah to eat. But eating and for God, or fasting for God, are very different things. To fast, because God says you should fast. Right? None of us like to fast. But it's easy to fast and to do it for the sake of spirituality. That's easy to do. What's hard to do is to eat and to do it for the sake of spirituality. We usually eat because we like it. We eat because we need to eat, but not because it's spiritual, not because we want to be close to God. Right? We fast to be close to God, but to eat to be close to God is a hard thing. And what this fellow did, his whole life, he ate because he wanted to remain Jewish. He worked in cutting trees because he wanted to remain Jewish. Everything he did. He could have cut down trees and eaten like he did because he wanted to. That's how he'd make a living. And that was not a mitzvah. So it's telling you that when we do things, our frame of mind, how we think about things, makes a difference. If we think, right, I'm doing the same act because I want to be close to God, then it becomes a mitzvah. It's a good thing. But you can help people, and you can help them because it makes you feel good, or you can help them because it's a mitzvah to help them. And in both cases, you're helping them, but one of them, you have a spiritual reward for, and when you don't. Because you didn't do anything wrong, but you didn't do anything special. And that's what this is. So if you eat on the 9th day of the month, because God tells you to, you'll receive a reward for it that's equal to your not eating on the 10th day of the month, which is Yom Kippur. Right? That's the idea behind it. That's why it says it in that way. And then it goes on. But with the next set of holidays, we have the holiday of Sukkos, because you're planting, right? And then that's on 689, and then suddenly, remember, we're all talking about all the holidays, right? And on 690 and 691, there's this line here, 44, and Moses declared the appointed festivals of Hashem to the children of Israel, right? It seems like this is ending the story of talking about all of the sacrifices and everything to do with the holidays. And suddenly it switches, it starts talking about other things. It talks about the lamps, and it talks about a certain type of bread they use in the temple, right? And yet it seems to be that it then continues talking more about the holidays. It's like sort of in the middle. You have the holidays, and then it talks about agriculture, and then it talks about the holidays. And what's going on here? So it's telling us that when you're observing the holidays, you have to also remember what happens when you're dealing with your agriculture. It's talking about the agriculture, but you're giving a portion of your field to the poor, when the poor need things, right? So in order, what the message is giving us is that if you want to celebrate a holiday, if you want to keep the holidays, you have to also make sure that the poor people can keep the holidays, not just you. Right? And this is why we make a point of raising money before the holidays for people. Because like the Rambam uses a quote, he says that if you have a table and you set your table for, let's say, keeping Passover, right? And you have all your silver and your gold and your fancy food is all out on the table, but there's no poor people at your table, you're not celebrating a holiday, you're filling your stomach. But if you have poor people at your table also, then you're celebrating the holiday. Right, and that's what the message is here. Right in the middle of the description of the holidays, it tells you about giving a portion of your field to the poor, to tell you that you can't celebrate your holidays if poor people can't celebrate their holiday. You can't, your celebration of Passover, Rosh Hashanah, Sukkot, any of these cannot really be complete if there are other Jews around who don't have the ability to do it. So you're responsible to do that.
So if we give tzedakah like you have, before each holiday, does that mean that we are giving towards those who haven't got, although we are going to be at a Seder and nobody there is poor?
Right. Well, what it means is that there are less poor people, right, because we're giving them food. So certainly there are two ways of doing it, and it's good to try to do both, which is to have people who don't have at your Seder or at your table on holidays, and also to make sure that there are the people who don't have, so they don't need to be at your table, right? So they can have their own. So both are important, but but if you give, right, and you don't have somebody at your table, it doesn't mean that it's bad. It's just that you could do both. That's all. All right, so then it goes on and switches to tells us an interesting story on 692 and 693. It says, the son of an Israelite woman went out. So first thing, that's a very strange thing to say. The son of an Israelite woman went out. Well, of course, he's Jewish, so where else would he come from? Right? Why are they telling you of an Israelite woman? Where's his father? You ever see them talk about a man and he comes from his mother, but it doesn't tell you about his father? And in the Torah, he always tells you, so-and-so, the son of so-and-so, and it tells you men. What's this saying? Then it says, and the answer, and he was the son of an Egyptian man. So he was an intermarriage. Right? This woman married an Egyptian, and then she went out of Egypt, right, with the other Jews. And so the son went among the children of Israel, and he got into a fight. The son of the Israelite woman and an Israelite man. So the guy gets into a fight with another Jew. Right? They're having a fist fight. The son of the Israelite woman pronounced the name and blasphemed. So the son of the woman who was, right, he was from the intermarried family, during the fight he curses the other man using the name of God. Right? We call curses our swear words. Right? But that's not what it's talking about. Here's a curse where you say, God should kill you. And you use the real name of God, right, when you say it. That's a very serious thing, right, to curse in that way. And especially then, because it could actually happen. Right, it actually could do it. Here, right, he goes and he does that. So there's a first time in the history of the Jewish people that you have someone who, what we call blasphemes, who uses the name of God in vain to curse somebody. It never happened before. So it says they brought him to Moshe. They didn't know what to do with the guy. Right? The name of his mother was Shalomish, the daughter of Divri of the tribe of Dan. So since they didn't know what to do with him, they placed him under guard to clarify for themselves through Hashem. They put him in jail at that point, which is not a Jewish... You'll notice that one of the punishments is not listed in the Torah, is jail. Jail is not a punishment that the Jews used. They didn't have such a thing. But they put him in jail because they didn't know what to do with him. So they just basically locked him up somewhere until they could go and ask God, what's the punishment for cursing in the name of God? So it says they placed him under guard. So Hashem spoke to Moshe, remove the blasphemer to the outside of the camp, and all those who heard shall lean their hands on his head. The entire assembly shall stone him. So then it says that any man who will blaspheme his God shall bear his sin, and one who pronounces blasphemy the name of Hashem shall be put to death. And that's what was to happen to him. So they didn't know at first. Right? And then they're told that this is what happened. Now, they went and it says that they put him, right? They locked him up. You have this one other place in the Torah, and that's with the person who went out to gather wood on Shabbos. We had that a while ago, where this person went out on Shabbos to gather wood. And it says that he did it so people would understand, right, that it's forbidden to do. That's how they rationalize it. In any case, he went out to do it. They also didn't know what to do to him. He was the first person who ever broke Shabbos in the history of the world after the Torah was given. They just got the Torah. So now what do you do to a person who breaks Shabbos like this? So they said they put him in a jail. But if you look closely at the words in the two cases, they use the words in singular to tell you that both of these people were in jail at the same time, but they were in different jails. They didn't put them together. In the case of the guy who broke Shabbos, they knew that guy was going to be killed. They knew it. They just didn't know exactly how he was going to be killed. The case of the blasphemer, they weren't sure. They weren't sure what was going to be. Do you die for this sin? Do you just get reprimanded for this sin? Do you get punished? Do you have a fine? What happens for this sin? They didn't know. So the commentaries tell us that they purposely didn't put them together. And the reason is that the one who was going to die for sure, that was the one who gathered the wood, but we don't know how he's going to die. Like, there's different forms of death. Should not be put together with a person who might not die. He has a trial, but we don't know if they're going to put him to death. So they shouldn't put him together. Why? Because the person who might not be put to death should not have to sit in jail with a guy who is, because he's going to feel like that's what's going to happen to me. You're going to put me to death. That's why I'm in here. No matter what happens, it's already done. I'm going to be put to death. Look, I'm on death row. I'm sitting here in jail with a guy who's going to be killed. So I'm going to be killed too. And that's not true. He might not have been killed. It might have been that God came back and said he has a punishment X, Y, and Z. So here we see that the psychological effect on a person to be put in death row is very serious. And we see also that God says you can't do that to someone. Well, who are we doing it to? We're doing it to a guy who's a bad guy. Right? He goes and curses somebody in the name of God. He's not a good person. Nevertheless, God's telling us he's a human. You have to treat him with sensitivity, and you have to treat him with dignity. So you don't put him somewhere where he's going to have emotional pain. Put him somewhere because you have to, but don't put him on death row because he might not be killed. And here we learn how sensitive we have to be to people. Say, even a guy who's a criminal, you have to treat him with dignity. You have to treat him sensitively. You have to care about his feelings. And the Torah tells us that. It's a very important point. Because if even a person who is known to be a criminal is treated that way, then we know that when we're dealing with other people, how much more so we should treat them well. Because they're not criminals. They're regular people. And yet we often don't. Right? It doesn't always happen. That people will often treat other people poorly. Okay, then it goes on. After it talks about this case of the blasphemer, it says in 17, and a man, if he strikes mortally any human being, any human life, he shall be put to death. So if a man kills another person, the penalty is death. And a man who strikes mortally an animal life shall make restitution. But if a man kills an animal, he has to pay the owner. A life for a life. And if a man inflicts a wound in his fellow, as he did, his shall be done to him. So if I hit somebody and make a wound, it should be done to me. A break for a break, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Right? So this has got to be one of the most misunderstood areas of the Torah. It seems to be telling us that if I go and poke somebody's eye out, then that person has a right to poke my eye out, and now we have justice. So you think about it. Is that justice? Like, I poke his eye out because I'm a criminal and I want to hurt him. So he can have justice now by poking my eye out. That's vengeance, but that's certainly not justice. And that's not what the Torah means at all. If we understand that the Torah is only a part of the whole thing and that you need the oral law to understand it, here the oral law tells us an eye for an eye does not mean I poke out someone's eye, he can poke my eye out. It means that if I poke out someone's eye, I have to pay him for the amount of loss he has for not having an eye. So let's say if he was a guy who just worked on an assembly line. So if he had 2 eyes or 1 eye, it's not that big a deal. I have to pay him, but only so much. How about if he was a jeweler and he needed his eyes to be able to see the diamonds, right? Or he was a painter, or he was a pilot, and he needed his eyes, or he can't do his job. He can't live normally. So then I have to pay him a lot more. So it's if I inflict a pain on somebody's eye, I have to pay him back the loss he has for the loss of his eye. They don't take my eye. So when you hear this expression, a tooth for a tooth, an eye for an eye, and they use it in Canadian media and so forth, and they're trying to say this is old world vengeance, it's not true. That's not what it meant at all. It meant the worth of an eye. The whole thing that if somebody, goes and hurts Mr. X and he's now unable to walk here in Canada today, right, he goes to court and sues that person for the fact that he can't walk. That's perfectly logical. That's what the Torah is saying. You have to pay him the loss that he made, right? But then in the middle it says about an animal, right? If you strike an animal, you have to make restitution. And then the last line then goes and changes, and it says, Moshe speaks to the children of Israel, and they took the blasphemer outside the camp and they stoned him to death. So now look at the picture. You have the blasphemer, he does something wrong. They put him in jail. They asked what should happen to him. They say he should be killed. And suddenly the Torah has a commercial in the middle. A totally different thing comes in the middle of this paragraph, and it says that if you strike a man, you should be put to death. If you kill an animal, you have to pay. Right? So if you kill someone, you should be killed. The blasphemer didn't kill anybody. The blasphemer just cursed somebody. Right? Now, if you kill an animal, you have to pay restitution. Well, the blasphemer didn't kill an animal. He didn't do anything to an animal. And then it goes back, and now the blasphemer should be killed. That's the end of it. What's this thing doing in the middle? Why is it here? What's it telling us? In the middle of this, it's like, you imagine you go to court and the judge says, okay, to the jury, have you made a decision? Yes, we have. Please read the decision. Well, in charge number 1, this person is guilty, and we were all thinking about going out for lunch now. We were arguing which place to go. We decided we were all going to go out to McDonald's. And in charge number 2, he's not guilty. What is this thing about McDonald's doing in the middle of this talk about in court? It's got nothing to do with anything. Same thing here. But the Torah is really telling us something important. Here we have the first time, really, in our history where you have somebody who's being put to death for something like this. Where the Jews, they have to inflict death on somebody. It's a capital punishment. Before you kill somebody, you have to know how precious human life is. You have to understand, human life is not something to play around with. If somebody has to be killed, it's a serious thing. And you have to be sensitive to it. And you have to realize, we don't go around killing people. If it has to happen, it has to happen. But don't start becoming harsh and thick and cruel. Realize this is something that is a necessary evil. We don't want to kill people. So in the middle of it, it tells you what, the seriousness about taking a life. Then it goes back and says they had to do it. Right? So it's making the people who are doing it sensitive. It's like, you can imagine, we don't have such thing here in Canada now, but there were times in history that people have the chief executioner. Right? That's his job. All he does is kill people. The government says this guy's to be hanged, this guy's this, and his job was to do it. Right? You can imagine that after he does this for a while, he becomes a pretty coarse person. How many times you got to kill someone before you start not feeling that you're killing people? You don't feel it anymore. You get used to it. Right? So the Torah says you can't do that. You can't get used to it. You have to always remember there are times when you have to do things that might be very, very difficult to do and very, very extreme. But never allow yourself to think it's okay. It's always, you have to do it always with sensitivity. So that's why it puts it in the middle there, to remind us of that. So that we should never get to such a point where we think that's okay to do. Right? We always have to remember that. And also, just so we know, I don't know if you've come across reading, cases where you find the Muslims stone people. Right? So The cases that I've seen, I can't say that this is authoritative, but what I've read in the news is what they've done is they take a person and they bury him in the dirt until they're up to their chest, right? And so they can't get anywhere. Their hands, their legs are buried in the dirt together with most of their body, and then so you only have like from here up exposed. And then everybody goes and takes stones and throws them at the person until they're killed. Right? It's a horrible form of death on many levels, and that's what they do. Our stoning, what is it? It's what they take the person, they get them dead drunk, so that they don't feel, and then they threw them off a cliff, so that as soon as they hit, they were dead. There was no torture involved. You have to die. All right, we don't want to kill people, but there are times when it has to be. But nobody says you have to make them suffer. Nobody says you have to humiliate them. Nobody, right? In fact, the Torah says that if somebody has to be hanged, as a form of death, you are required to take them down as soon as they're dead. Why? Because you don't want people to come and look at it. Right? The guy had to be killed. We wish he didn't have to be killed. He had to be. But it's not something we use as entertainment, that you leave him there and the whole city has to come and watch. Right? That's very different. So it's the same idea here. And that's why if you read in Pirkei Avos and in other places, it says that in Judaism we have the death penalty. But according to the rabbis in the Talmud, if it happens more than one death in 70 years, that was a bloody generation. And Rabbi Akiva says, if I'm in the court, I'll never kill anybody. I'll never let them do it. In other words, our approach is we don't want to do this. There are times when you have to, but we will do whatever we can to try to make it so that it doesn't happen. Right? In other cultures, they're much more inclined towards violence and torture. We're not. There are times when you have a person and they're a threat to society. Better that person should be dead than they should be around to kill people. Right? They go around killing people. You have people like that. But we don't want to kill them. If we have to, we have to, but we don't want to. And we don't enjoy it. We don't take any pleasure from it. And we don't look at it. Right? It says that, one time the king, they tell a story in the Midrash, that the king had a brother, and the brother was a thief. And he lived his whole life as a thief. And one time he got caught. And the punishment for being a thief was they hung him. And they hung him. And they left him up. And the next day, someone comes to town, they look and they say, look at that. They hung the king. The king was hung, right? Because it was his brother. It looks like the king. So the king was hung. Right? This idea is, we believe that every human has godliness in them. We're made in the image of God. So if somebody has to be killed, you have to take them down right away, because they're in the image of God. Even if they're dead, right? It's an embarrassment to that person. Nobody says you have to embarrass them. It's an embarrassment. You don't have to do that. They have to be killed, but you don't have to humiliate them. So that's how we do it. And as I said, in our history, it was extremely rare that people were killed. Extremely rare, even though it talks about it in the Torah. It's just a different way of doing things. While many cultures were violent, but when they use this expression, they talk about the Old Testament God of vengeance. And you hear this in the world. It's actually false. The God of the Torah is very much wants people to change and be better, not to be killed and punished. There is no idea. There's vengeance. It's not part of what we are. Only if you read it literally and you don't understand what you're reading. So that's really what the parsha deals with here. We continue on very soon at the Parshas Bahar next week, and that deals a lot of the laws pertaining to agriculture. So it's not going to be as violent as this week's. Okay, so thank you all very much, and we'll be back to normal.